After months of strict lockdown and weeks more of cautious easing, France says it's ready to lift most of the restrictions it imposed over the COVID-19 pandemic. It's a sign that some of Europe's hardest hit countries could be beginning to return to a more normal life. Katie Dartford reports.
Bars, restaurants, museums and more schools will be allowed to get up and running again as of June the 2nd in most of France. Announcing the second stage of lockdown easing, Prime Minister Edouard Philippe also said the 100-kilometre travel limits will be scrapped for parts of the country in the green zone. That includes everywhere outside the Ile-de-France region, which will have to wait until June the 22nd before Phase 2 kicks in. France is aiming to reopen its borders with other European countries on June the 15th, but public gatherings larger than 10 people are still banned. As countries across Europe gradually emerge from months of COVID-19 lockdown, the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has called for debt relief to be offered to all developing and middle-income countries. During a meeting of world leaders, he said the pandemic will cause historic level of hunger and famine and over 1.5 billion people unable to earn a living unless action is taken now. In the UK, the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson announced that from next week, up to 6 people from different households will be allowed to meet outdoors in England.
At the moment, as you know, people can meet in parks, but not in private gardens. And this was a cautious first step. But we know that there is no difference in the health risk. So we will now allow people to meet in gardens and other private outdoor spaces.
Meanwhile, thousands of people in the UK took part in the 10th week of Clap for Carers in what could be the last time the weekly event takes place. Its founder said it carried us through the peak of the crisis and should become an annual event. Katie Dartford for Euronews.
Well, our reporter David Chazan joins us now live from the French capital, from what looks like in front of the Pompidou Centre. David, good morning. Now, we've heard in the package there and we've seen on the map that the Paris region is pretty much the only area that's not part of France that's been declared a green zone. Why is that and what does it mean in practice?
Good morning, Alistair. The reason for that is because the virus is still circulating more actively in the Paris region, and so there's more pressure on hospitals, and the risk of catching COVID-19 is considered to be higher than in other parts of mainland France. Nevertheless, the Paris region has been downgraded from a red zone, which it was until now, where the virus is circulating particularly actively, to an orange zone. So there has been an improvement. What does it mean in practice? Well, Parisians are going to have to live with more restrictions than people in other parts of France, but cafes and restaurants like the one behind me will be able to open from Tuesday, except in Paris they will not be able to serve people indoors, only on pavement terraces. However, museums like the Pompidou Centre on the other side will also be allowed to reopen from next week, provided that visitors observe social distancing. Now, parks are going to be open in Paris from tomorrow for the first time in more than 2 months. This is something that Parisians have been clamouring for because they've been complaining that there have been large crowds gathering on the banks of the Seine and along the banks of the Canal Saint-Martin, and in some cases police have had to break them up. So despite the loosening of restrictions, people in France are not being allowed to gather in groups larger than 10 people.
David Chazan, live from Paris. Thanks very much.